Welcome to the case of the Calligrapher's Curse, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Sherlock Holmes, the Eastern Enigma, Tales from the Great Hiatus, playing in the year 1892. For years the world believed my friend Sherlock Holmes had perished at the Reichenbach Falls. It was only recently, within a hidden compartment of his old travel trunk, that I discovered the truth of his great hiatus. These journals, penned in a cipher only Mycroft's resources could help me break, reveal his secret travels through the enigmatic East between 1891 and 1894, a time when the master of logic confronted the ancient mysteries of the Orient. From these decoded pages I shall now relate the first of these remarkable accounts, an affair that took place in the heart of Persia, which he called the Case of the Calligrapher's Curse. Chapter 1. Though my chronicles of Mr. Sherlock Holmes have largely concerned themselves with the fogs and gaslit streets of London, there were occasions when his singular talents were required in climes altogether more exotic. The particulars of this affair reached me much later. The tale itself began not in Baker Street, but in the sun-drenched heart of Persia, within the ancient city of Isfahan. It commenced with a death, a treaty, and a curse. The Shah's royal workshop was a place of profound quiet. The only sounds permitted were the whisper of a reed pen on vellum, and the soft murmur of prayers, light, thick with the motes of fine dust, slanted through latticed windows, illuminating the stooped figure of Reza Khorasani, the master calligrapher. He was an artist whose hand was said to be guided by divinity itself. On this day he was inscribing the final critical lines of the Anglo-Persian Treaty, a document of immense political importance. It was Major Henry Stamford of the Foreign Office who discovered him. An hour past the appointed time, a gnawing anxiety propelled him through the courtyard. His boots echoed with a harshness that felt like a sacrilege in that hallowed space. A gentle rap upon the heavy cedar door yielded no reply. A second, more insistent knock also went unanswered. With a growing sense of dread, Stamford pushed the door inward. It groaned on its hinges, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. The scene within was one of dreadful stillness. Reza Khorasani was slumped over his work table, his body locked in a rigid tetanic arc, a rictus of agony frozen upon his face. Beside his stiffened hand lay an overturned porcelain cup. Its contents, a dark, fragrant tea, had pooled and cooled upon the polished wood. The air, usually redolent with a scent of fine ink and parchment, was now tainted with a faint, bitter almond odour, one that Stamford could not quite place. But it was the manuscript itself that seized the Major's attention and turned his blood to ice. The treaty, a masterpiece of diplomacy and artistry, was ruined. Where the calligrapher's final, elegant characters should have been, there was only an ugly, sprawling stain. It was not the simple smudge of a spill. Instead, the ink had seemingly dissolved, erupting into a crystalline, web-like pattern that glittered malevolently in the shafts of light. The vellum around it was puckered and brittle, as if touched by some potent chemical. The court physician was a man more concerned with politics than pathology. He was swift in his verdict, a violent seizure, brought on by intense concentration. A tragic, but natural, end. The matter was officially closed. But for Major Stamford, the nightmare was just beginning. He stood alone in his office later that evening. The ruined document lay before him, a symbol of his career's impending collapse. A curse. They are calling it a divine curse, answered Major Henry Stamford. He spoke the words aloud to the empty room, his voice a low, ragged thing. The whispers had already spread through the court like wildfire. The heavens themselves had struck down the hand that would bind Persia to the British. The Russian delegation, he knew, would be fanning those flames with quiet satisfaction. The treaty was dead, and with it, years of delicate work. This is no curse. This is sabotage. It is ruin, said Major Henry Stamford. He paced the length of his Persian carpet, the rhythmic thump of his footsteps the only sound. Desperation was a closing fist around his heart. He needed a mind untainted by superstition, a mind that saw not curses but chemicals, not divine will but human agency. And then, a memory surfaced. It was a conversation from months ago in Calcutta, about an eccentric Norwegian explorer named Sigerson. A colleague had claimed the man possessed an almost supernatural faculty for observation and analysis. A long shot, a madman's hope. But it was the only one he had left. Many months later, in Baker Street, the rooms once more thick with the smoke of his strongest shag, Holmes recounted to me the curious circumstances of his first encounter in Isfahan. He had, as the world believed, been pursuing his chemical researches in Montpellier, but was in truth operating under the guise of a Norwegian explorer named Sigerson. It was in this guise he found himself in a quiet corner of a tea-house, a place of shadowed archways and intricately tiled walls, when his quarry at last appeared. The air, Holmes recounted, hung heavy with the sweet perfume of cardamom and rosewater. The only sounds, the gentle clinking of glass cups, and the distant, rhythmic bubbling of a brass samovar. Into this scene a man entered, his shoulders set with military precision, though his eyes darted about with an anxiety that ill-suited his bearing. This was Major Henry Stamford, of the Indian Political Service. The Major approached Holmes's table, his footsteps muffled by the thick Persian carpets. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. "Mr. Sigerson? I was told I might find you here. My name is Stamford. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance." "Captain Al-Jamil," responded Major Henry Stamford. Holmes, who had been intently studying the patterns of steam rising from his glass, looked up slowly. His gaze was placid, his expression one of mild academic curiosity. "Indeed. A fine man. He spoke of you. You have a matter of some urgency, I presume. Your hand, Major, it has a slight tremor, not of drink, but of strain. The strain of a man who fears his ink may be drying too quickly," observed Sherlock Holmes. Stamford started, glancing at his own hand, as if it had betrayed him. He pulled a chair out and sat, leaning forward across the small, inlaid table. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "My God, sir, you are as they say. It is not my ink, but the Shah's. The treaty, Mr. Sigerson, the Anglo-Persian treaty, is on the verge of collapse. Our master calligrapher, Reza Khorasani, died at the very moment of its completion," said Major Henry Stamford. "A convenient demise. I have read of it. A seizure, was it not?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. "So the court physicians say. But it is the work itself that has caused the panic. His final inscription, the very seal of the agreement, dissolved before our eyes into an ugly, crystalline stain. They are calling it a curse, a divine sign against our British influence. The mullahs are stirring up the people, and the Russian legation can barely conceal its delight. This is not superstition, sir, it is sabotage of the highest order," remarked Major Henry Stamford. Holmes took a slow sip of his tea, his eyes never leaving the Major's agitated face. The sounds of the tea-house seemed to fade, leaving only the intensity of the Major's plea hanging in the air. "And you wish for me to dispute a miracle?" "A difficult proposition for a humble explorer," Sherlock Holmes noted. "I wish for you to find the man behind the miracle. If we cannot present a rational explanation, Persia will fall into the Tsar's orbit within the month. We will be undone." "You are our last hope," remarked Major Henry Stamford. There was a long silence, broken only by the faint hiss of the samovar. Holmes placed his glass down with a soft click, a decisive sound that sealed the pact. "Superstition is a formidable weapon, Major, for it requires no logic to wield. Very well. I find the problem to be one of singular interest. My methods, however, are my own, and my presence here must remain entirely unknown. Ideal, in fact, not faith," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. A wave of palpable relief washed over Major Stamford's features. He nodded vigorously. Anything. Absolute discretion. Whatever you require. Major Henry Stamford answered. Holmes leaned back, a flicker of his true, predatory intelligence surfacing in his eyes. The languid explorer was gone. The hunter had taken his place. Then let us waste no more time on pleasantries. Take me to this cursed manuscript. I should like to see the handiwork of this divine saboteur for myself, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Major Stamford's office within the British legation was a world away from the fragrant chaos of the Isfahan tea-house. Here the air was still and heavy, smelling faintly of sealing wax and sun-baked leather. A ponderous oak door closed behind us with a soft final thud. It shut out the distant cries of the bazaar, enclosing us in a chamber of anxious diplomacy. The Major, his face pale in the slatted light filtering through the shutters, gestured towards a large mahogany desk. His voice was a strained whisper, as if he feared being overheard even here. "There it is, Mr. Sigerson, the source of all our troubles," answered Major Henry Stamford. "Upon a field of green baize lay the ruined treaty. Even I, with no expertise in such matters, could appreciate the tragedy. What had once been a masterpiece of Nasta'liq script was now defaced by a ghastly, sprawling stain. The elegant Persian characters, which should have flowed across the page like woven silk, were gone. In their place was a dark, angry blemish that rendered the final, crucial lines of the document utterly illegible. The vellum around the stain was warped and stiff, as if subjected to some intense, unnatural process. My companion, whom I knew only as Holmes, stepped forward without a word. The languid explorer, Sigerson, had vanished, replaced by the keen, hawk-like investigator I knew so well. He produced a powerful pocket lens from his coat and leaned over the desk, his long, thin nose mere inches from the parchment. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of the vellum as he gently manipulated it under the light. "The millers claim it is the hand of God," the Major murmured, wringing his hands. "A divine rebuke for consorting with infidels." "The entire court is paralyzed by fear," replied Major Henry Stamford. Holmes made no reply, his concentration absolute. He brought the document closer to his face, inhaling deeply. For a moment I thought his eccentricities had finally overcome him, but then he straightened up, a familiar glint of discovery in his sharp grey eyes. His voice cut through the Major's superstitious dread with the clean precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Superstition, Major, is a formidable weapon in the right hands. But it is a poor substitute for chemistry." "Do you notice it?" deduced Sherlock Holmes. "Notice what? I see only a catastrophe," replied Major Henry Stamford. "An aroma. Faint, but distinct. It is citrus, but of a specific kind." "Bergamot," Sherlock Holmes responded. I leaned closer myself, but could detect nothing beyond the dry, ancient scent of the parchment. Holmes, however, was already pointing his lens back at the stain. "Furthermore, observe this structure under magnification. Do you see these minute crystalline formations at the edge of the stain? This is not the work of any celestial power, Major. It is the residue of a rapid chemical reaction. An acidic agent, likely introduced to the calligrapher's ink, was designed to activate after a period of time. It corroded both pigment and vellum. The divine curse, I assure you, Major, was delivered from a bottle," Sherlock Holmes responded. Major Stamford stared, his mouth agape. The supernatural horror of his situation was stripped away, revealing the cold, calculated logic of sabotage. Relief washed over his face, palpable. Holmes turned from the desk, his expression intense. "The scent of bergamot is the key. It is an incongruous element, an unexpected guest at this tragic affair. It tells us that something foreign was introduced to the scene. To find our saboteur, we must first discover the source of this chemical. We must examine the master's tools, his inks, his entire workshop." "Take me to the sanctum of Reza Khorasani," deduced Sherlock Holmes. Following Holmes's pronouncement upon the treaty's true nature, We were granted access to the workshop of the late Reza Khorasani. The door, a heavy thing of carved cypress, opened with a low groan, admitting us from the sun-bleached courtyard into a sudden, reverent twilight. The air within was still and cool, heavy with the clean, dry scent of paper, and the faint, earthy aroma of raw pigments. It was not a place of death, but a sanctuary of art, where the profound silence was broken only by the soft shuffle of our own feet upon the worn Persian carpets. Light, filtered through an intricate lattice window, fell in geometric patterns across the room, illuminating rows of reed pens, each cut to a perfect razor-sharp nib. Polished agate burnishes lay beside pots of ink, and on low shelves, powdered minerals glowed with jewel-like intensity, lapis, cinnabar, and malachite. My companion, in his guise as the Norwegian explorer Sigerson, moved with a quiet intensity, his keen grey eyes sweeping across the room, cataloguing every detail with a speed and precision that was his alone. "Observe the order, Watson. Not a brush out of place, not a pot misaligned. This was the sanctum of a man whose mind was as disciplined as his hand, a man of unwavering habit," Sherlock Holmes said. He drifted towards the low divan, where the master calligrapher had clearly spent his final hours. Beside it, on a small inlaid table, sat a collection of items, a brass inkwell, a small tray for mixing colours, and something that seemed jarringly out of place. It was a brightly lacquered tin, its label bearing the familiar coat of arms of a London grocer. And yet, habits can be influenced. "What do you make of that?" replied Sherlock Holmes. I drew closer. The English lettering was unmistakable, a startling intrusion of my own world into this ancient Persian one. Good heavens, Holmes! It is a canister of Earl Grey tea from Fortnum and Mason. A most peculiar indulgence for a traditionalist like Khorasani, asked Dr. John Watson. Peculiar is the very word. You recall the scent upon the vellum, Watson, the one you could not quite place amidst the ruin of the ink, observed Sherlock Holmes. The connection struck me with the force of a physical blow. Bergamot, the oil that gives this very tea its scent, wondered Dr. John Watson. Precisely. The overturned cup from the death scene now finds its source. The instrument of the so-called curse was not some mystical force, but a simple cup of English tea, observed Sherlock Holmes. He now moved with renewed purpose, producing from his travelling kit a small, magnifying lens and a series of tiny glass vials. With a surgeon's delicate touch, he opened the recently unsealed canister. Under his lens he compared the crystalline residue from the stained treaty vellum with the dark tea leaves within the tin. Satisfied, he then meticulously collected minute samples from the various ink and pigment pots, corking each vial with care. The picture becomes clearer. Our murderer introduced a chemical agent into the tea. As Khorasani worked, perhaps the first effects of a poison took hold. A tremor in the hand, a moment of dizziness, the cup spills. The chemically laced tea reacts with the fresh, wet ink, dissolving the lamp-black and gum arabic into that destructive crystalline stain. A perfect illusion of divine wrath, engineered in a teapot, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. But who, Holmes? Who would provide such a gift, knowing it would be used at that precise moment? Dr. John Watson inquired. A gift of this expense and origin is not found in any common store. We must seek a purveyor of rare and fine goods, very likely of foreign extraction. A man who deals in the unique tools of the artisan trade. Our path lies in the commercial heart of this city. We must now descend into the Grand Bazaar, declared Sherlock Holmes. Having secured our samples from the late calligrapher's sanctum, Holmes declared our next destination, the great heart of Isfahan, the Grand Bazaar. Stepping beneath its domed archways, we plunged headlong into a maelstrom of life, leaving the quiet solemnity of our investigation behind. The air itself felt thick, a physical presence heavy with cardamom and roasting nuts. To our left, a coppersmith's rhythmic clang provided a percussive beat. It wove through the ceaseless symphony of haggling merchants, and the melodic lament of a distant stringed instrument. Holmes, disguised as the stoic Norwegian explorer Sigerson, navigated the labyrinthine passages with an uncanny sense of purpose. His keen grey eyes missed nothing. They darted from vibrant cascades of silk to the glint of intricate silverwork, absorbing every detail of the chaotic tableau. He seemed less a man overwhelmed, and more a scholar in a vast living library. Observe, Watson. The finest artisans are drawn to the finest materials. A man like Khorasani, a master of his craft, would not content himself with the common stocks. We seek a purveyor of the unique, the esoteric, a seller not merely of goods but of secrets, Sherlock Holmes responded. His search led us at last to a quieter corridor, where the boisterous aromas of the food stalls gave way to the subtle scent of incense and old paper. We stopped before a modest shop, its doorway hung with a simple but elegant kilim. Above it, a carved wooden sign bore Farsi script and, beneath it, a smaller, neatly painted sign in French, Volkov, Fourniture d'artiste. The interior was a haven of meticulous order. Vials of pigment, in 1,000 hues, lined the shelves like jewels, while rolls of parchment and paper stood stacked in precise arrangements. As a small bell chimed our entry, a man turned from a tall cabinet. He was broad-shouldered, with a handsome, open face and a well-kept beard. He greeted us with a smile that seemed entirely genuine. "Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome. You seek something to capture the beauty of our city, perhaps? A lapis lazuli for the sky, a carmine for the sunset," responded Dmitri Volkov. "I am a man of science and letters. I am interested in permanence. I seek the finest gall ink, one that will outlast the memory of its author," stated Sherlock Holmes. Volkov's smile widened. He moved with a practiced grace, retrieving a small, dark bottle from a locked glass case. The soft clink of the vial against the counter was the only sound in the shop. "Ah, a connoisseur. This is my own mixture, prepared for only my most discerning clients. Iron gall, yes, but balanced with a particular gum from the north. It is as black as a starless night, and, I assure you, as eternal. It is the ink of kings and treaties," replied Dmitri Volkov. Holmes held the bottle to the light, his expression unreadable. I watched his gaze sweep over the Russian's hands. He had spotted something, faint chemical stains around the man's fingernails, almost invisible against his skin. The merchant's charm was undeniable, yet I felt a familiar tension in my companion's posture, the stillness of a predator that has found its scent. An admirable sales pitch. "I shall take a small sample. One must always test the claims of kings," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. As we stepped back out into the clamour of the bazaar, the small, heavy vial safely in his pocket, Holmes turned to me. The sounds of the market seemed to fade as he spoke. His focus, absolute. "The ink of treaties," he says. An interesting choice of words, is it not? "Now, Watson, let us return to our rooms. We have a new specimen to introduce to the rigours of chemistry," replied Sherlock Holmes. We returned from the intoxicating chaos of the Grand Bazaar to the comparative tranquillity of our lodgings. The air within the caravanserai still carried the faint mingled sense of cardamom and roasted nuts from the kitchens below, and the distant murmur of bartering voices drifted up from the courtyard. Yet within our small chamber, an entirely different atmosphere was taking hold. My companion, having shed the guise of the inquisitive explorer Sigerson, was once more the focused man of science I knew so well. He had unpacked his small, leather-bound travelling case, which to the casual observer might contain little more than shaving implements and papers. To me, it was a familiar sight, a marvel of compact chemistry. Upon a low wooden table he arranged a spirit lamp, several glass test tubes, and a row of stoppered vials with the swift, precise movements of a surgeon. The flame of the lamp hissed into life, casting flickering shadows upon the plastered walls. From a twist of paper, he carefully tipped a few dark, brittle flakes, scrapings from the ruined treaty itself. Into a second tube, he placed a single, viscous drop of the true ink, procured from the late Reza Khorasani's personal inkwell. He worked in silence, his hawk-like features illuminated by the small, steady flame, his concentration absolute. Observe, Watson. The foundation of the Persian master's craft is tradition. For centuries the finest Nasta'liq has been rendered in iron gall ink, a simple compound of oak galls, iron sulfate, and a binder. It is permanent. It darkens with age, biting into the very fibres of the paper, Sherlock Holmes said. He took up a pipette and drew a clear fluid from one of the vials. With immense care he allowed a single drop to fall into the tube containing the calligrapher's authentic ink. I leaned closer, watching. There was no discernible change. The dark liquid merely accepted the addition, swirling placidly in the glass. As expected. A stable compound. Now, for the main performance, declared Sherlock Holmes. He turned his attention to the second tube, the one containing the flakes from the blighted treaty. He administered the same clear reagent. The effect was immediate and startling. A distinct effervescence, a soft but audible fizzing, erupted from the flakes. The liquid clouded instantly, and a fine, chalky precipitate began to drift like snow to the bottom of the tube, settling with a faint whisper. You see? This is no iron gall ink. It is a modern, unstable concoction, likely a silver-based compound, designed to decompose rapidly upon exposure to a mild acidic agent, perhaps even one present in the paper itself. The inkwell was switched, Watson. The master calligrapher wrote his final words not with the tool of his art, but with the instrument of his own unwitting sabotage, declared Sherlock Holmes. The demonstration, dramatic and conclusive, left no room for doubt. The truth of it settled upon me, with a chilling certainty, a revelation as stark as any physical impact. This was not a divine curse, but a cold, calculated act of chemical warfare waged upon a piece of parchment. Before I could frame a response, our deductions were interrupted. A sharp, insistent rapping echoed from the heavy wooden door of our chamber, a sound that seemed entirely out of place in our quiet sanctuary of science. The revelation of a chemical deception, not a divine curse, had visibly fortified Major Stamford. His step was lighter as he led us through a labyrinth of alleys, where the scent of spices gave way to the sharp metallic tang of the coppersmith's quarter. The din of hammers on metal echoed from the high walls, a percussive symphony to our grim errand. Stamford's voice, tight with a newfound, if brittle, confidence, named the man. His name is Jafar al-Hamadani. A calligrapher of some note, though his ambition has always far outstripped his talent. His jealousy of Khorasani was the talk of the bazaar. He claimed Khorasani's fame was a matter of patronage, not purity of line, Major Henry Stamford replied. We paused before a heavy wooden door, a sliver of lamplight visible beneath it. From within came a faint scratching sound, the dry whisper of a reed pen on paper. Stamford rapped his knuckles sharply against the wood. The scratching ceased. The man who opened the door was gaunt and hawk-nosed, his fingers stained to the second knuckle with a rainbow of inks. His workshop was a chaotic jumble of stacked papers, half-finished commissions, and 100 pots of pigment that lent the air a dusty, earthy smell. His eyes, dark and restless, flickered between us. My friend adopted the unassuming air of Sigerson, the curious traveller. We are told you are a master of the pen and seek to purchase a sample of your esteemed work, observed Sherlock Holmes. Jafar's expression curdled at the word master. He drew himself up, a theatrical gesture of wounded pride. His voice was a reedy torrent of indignation. Esteemed? My work is divine. But in this city of blind merchants, they celebrate the plodding hand of a stonemason like Khorasani. His letters had no soul, no fire. They were rigid, disciplined, dead things on the page. I paint with the wind. My characters dance. But does the Shah ask for Jafar? No. He asks for the man who draws letters as if laying bricks, Jafar al-Hamadani replied. As Jafar launched into his tirade, Holmes's gaze drifted from the calligrapher, beginning a slow, methodical sweep of the room. His eyes lingered on the racks of inks, the mortars and pestles for grinding pigments, the simple pots of gum, arabic and soot. He saw no glint of chemical apparatus, no sign of anything beyond the traditional tools of an ancient craft. And now they say his final work was cursed? Bah! It is the only interesting thing the man ever produced. Perhaps the Almighty grew as tired of his tedious perfection as I did, responded Jafar al-Hamadani. We took our leave soon after, Holmes purchasing a small, floridly illuminated verse. Once back in the clamour of the alley, Jafar's door slamming shut behind us, Stamford turned to Holmes with an expectant frown. Well? There is your man, surely. The motive is as plain as the nose on his face. He all but confessed his hatred, remarked Major Henry Stamford. Holmes merely shook his head, his voice calm and precise, cutting through the Major's excitement. He has the envy, Major, but not the intellect. A man whose entire world is composed of lamp-blackened saffron could no more conceive of a complex chemical reaction than he could build a locomotive, explained Sherlock Holmes. I saw the logic at once. Jafar's passions were artistic, not scientific. Observe his workshop. It is a shrine to tradition. All his colours are ground from minerals and plants. His inks are of oak gall and iron salts. There is not a single bottle of acid, not a phial of acetate, not one piece of evidence to suggest a mind capable of constructing the unstable compound that ruined your treaty. No, this man is a peacock, all noise and display. Our culprit is a quieter, more patient creature altogether, Sherlock Holmes said. Stamford's face fell, his one clear path dissolving into mist. By eliminating the obvious suspect, we now faced only the subtle and the unseen. As we walked, Holmes fell into a profound silence, his eyes fixed on some distant point, his mind already sifting the finer, more elusive details of the case. The dismissal of the rival calligrapher, for all its theatricality, left us in a frustrating inertia. I sat by the latticed window, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sun, the clang of a distant coppersmith, a rhythmic counterpoint to the city's hum. Holmes, however, found no peace. He paced the Persian rug like a caged tiger, his long fingers steepled one moment, running through his hair the next. The air grew thick with his restless energy, mingling with the scent of Major Stamford's documents spread across our table. Holmes, are you certain we were right to discard the man so quickly? His jealousy was a palpable thing. A motive of that strength, wondered Dr. John Watson. Is a fire that produces a great deal of smoke but no heat, my dear Watson. He has the passion of an artist, not the cold precision of a chemist. He would have used a knife, not a formula. No, the solution lies elsewhere. It is here, somewhere in this room, staring us in the face, stated Sherlock Holmes. He stopped his pacing abruptly, his gaze fixed upon the table. For a moment he stood utterly still, eyes narrowed to slits, like a statue. Then, with a sudden, darting motion, he snatched up two pieces of evidence, the small, sealed packet of spoiled vellum, and Stamford's notes on Reza Khorasani's final moments. He brought the vellum to his face and inhaled sharply. Of course, how could I have been so blind? The scent, a faint citrus note. Bergamot. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Bergamot? Like that found in Earl Grey tea? What of it? Dr. John Watson replied. His eyes were alight now with that familiar, ferocious gleam of discovery I knew so well. Tapping a long finger on Stamford's notes, his voice dropped to a low, intense pitch that vibrated with certainty. Precisely. What did the servant report? That just before beginning his work, Khorasani drank a special cup of tea, a gift from a merchant intended to steady the hand. a merchant dealing in rare supplies for artisans. "The tea, Watson. The tea was the delivery mechanism," remarked Sherlock Holmes. He resumed his pacing, no longer out of frustration, but with the energy of intellectual triumph. Each step punctuated a point in his chain of reasoning. "Do you not see the fiendish elegance of it? It is a twofold attack, delivered in a single cup. The leaves were laced with two agents, Watson. First, a fast-acting and difficult-to-trace poison, an alkaloid perhaps, to induce a sudden cardiac collapse. This accounts for the master's death. But second, and more brilliantly, they contained a powdered chemical catalyst," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "A catalyst? For what purpose?" remarked Dr. John Watson. "For the ink, man!" The calligrapher drinks the tea, and an invisible residue of the catalyst clings to his fingers. He picks up his reed pen, transferring the catalyst to its tip. He dips it in the ink, and then sets to work upon the vellum. The catalyst, now in the ink itself, reacts with a specific compound in the paper, causing the elegant script to decompose into that hideous, illegible stain. The man collapses, and at the very same moment his life's work dissolves before the horrified eyes of the witnesses. It is not a curse, Watson. It is chemistry, disguised as divine wrath, observed Sherlock Holmes. I stared at him, the sheer audacity and ingenuity of the plot leaving me breathless. A murder and an act of political sabotage, perfectly synchronized and executed with a single cup of tea. Holmes halted before me, his expression hardening into one of grim resolve. There is only one man in Isfahan who has presented himself as a simple merchant, yet who deals in the very inks and papers at the heart of this affair. A man whose interests would be directly served by the treaty's failure. A man with the charm to offer a gift of tea, and, I suspect, the hidden expertise to engineer its contents. Deduced Sherlock Holmes. Volkov. The Russian, responded Dr. John Watson. Indeed. I believe it is time Mr. Dmitri Volkov and I had a more technical discussion. Fetch your coat, Watson. We are going to purchase some lapis lazuli. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Upon his return from the Grand Bazaar, Holmes shed the persona of the languid explorer Sigerson, as a man might shed a heavy coat. His eyes, which had been clouded with a feigned scholarly interest, now held the hard, bright glitter of a hunter who has his quarry in sight. He paced the length of our small room, the rug muffling his footfalls, his energy a palpable force in the still afternoon air. "Did you find what you were looking for, Holmes?" remarked Dr. John Watson. "More, Watson, far more. I went seeking a tradesman, and I have found a master chemist. Our Russian friend Dmitri Volkov is a man of quite extraordinary talents," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused by the window, looking out upon the sun-baked courtyard below. Then, turning back to me, he began to recount his expedition. I had, he explained, entered Volkov's establishment for a second time. The small bell above the door announced my arrival, its delicate chime quickly lost in the hum of the bazaar. The air within was thick with the aromas of linseed oil and gum arabic. I approached him under the guise of a dilettante, wishing to procure the finest lapis lazuli for an illuminated manuscript. He was perfectly obliging, his manner that of any merchant eager for a substantial sale, speaking of the mines of Badakhshan and the purity of his grindings, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Holmes then described how he had steered the conversation from the simple aesthetics of colour to the more complex science of its preservation. He had woven a careful web of technical inquiry, designed to test the true depth of the merchant's knowledge. I then introduced, as if casually, the vexing issue of ultramarine's degradation when exposed to even mild acidic compounds. It was the first cast of my line. A simple merchant would have offered a simple solution. A better quality vellum, perhaps. But not Volkov. His eyes lit with the fire of the true expert, the man who cannot bear to see his subject treated with ignorance, explained Sherlock Holmes. As Holmes spoke, I could almost hear the subtle shift in the Russian's voice he described, from the smooth tones of commerce to the precise, confident cadence of a university lecturer. Volkov had apparently taken the bait. He corrected me at once, speaking of washing the pigment in a solution of ammonium carbonate to neutralize any free sulfuric acid. A sound, if somewhat elementary principle. But then, Watson, came the critical error. Swollen with pride at his own erudition, he went further. He mentioned the use of a specific tartrate salt as a sequestering agent, a chemical used to prevent ionic contamination in certain iron gall inks. A tartrate, Watson. The very class of compound I suspect was used to catalyze the destruction of the treaty, observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that filled the room. That is not the knowledge of a man who merely grinds stones and sells powders. That is the precise expertise of a man who designs chemical reactions. He was no longer a merchant, but a scientist, boasting of his craft. He has confessed, Watson, not with his words, but with his vanity, Sherlock Holmes noted. The certainty in his voice was absolute. He had found his man, not through a footprint or a cigar ash, but through the intellectual pride of a formidable adversary. The final piece of the puzzle had been laid, and I knew, with a thrill of anticipation, that the time for observation was over, the time to act was at hand. We were conducted to Major Stamford's office, a sanctuary of British order amidst the Isfahani bustle. Heavy damask curtains muted the clamour of the street vendors below, and the only sound within the room was the steady, metronomic tick of a grand mantel clock. The Major, his face etched with anxiety, paced before a large map of Persia, the polished floorboards groaning softly under his boots. He stopped as we entered, his gaze fixed upon my companion. Mr. Sigerson, thank you for coming so promptly. I confess, after your last communication, I have scarcely slept. You said you had a theory, a conclusion, Major Henry Stamford replied. Holmes, in his guise as the Norwegian explorer, inclined his head. He moved to the window and stared down into the courtyard for a moment before turning back, his expression unreadable. I have more than a theory, Major. I have the entire affair, from its inception to its tragic end. The death of Reza Khorasani was not the result of a divine curse. It was murder, executed with a chemical ingenuity that is as brilliant as it is diabolical, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Stamford sank into his chair, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms. In the ensuing silence, the clock's metronomic tick seemed to swell, filling the room. Murder? But how? The man was alone. There was no poison found, no sign of violence, answered Major Henry Stamford. The poison was not in his body but in his art. The very tools of his trade were turned against him. You have been looking for an assassin with a dagger, Major, when you should have been looking for a chemist with a pot of ink, declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's voice was flat and precise, each word laid down like an incontrovertible fact. He began to pace slowly, his tone that of a lecturer addressing a captivated student. Consider the elements. A unique paper, supplied exclusively to the court calligrapher. A special ink, procured from a trusted merchant. The paper, I submit, was treated with a latent chemical agent. Colourless, dormant, and waiting, observed Sherlock Holmes. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air, his gaze fixed on the Major's face. The ink, however, was the key. It contained the catalyst. When Khorasani dipped his qalam, he armed the weapon. With every stroke he made upon the treaty, he was not only sealing Persia's fate, but his own, Sherlock Holmes noted. Stamford stared, his mouth slightly agape. I could see the pieces falling into place behind his eyes, the vague shape of superstition giving way to the sharp lines of logic. Good heavens, the ink merchant, the Russian Volkov! You suspected him from the start, replied Major Henry Stamford. My visit to him yesterday confirmed it. His knowledge of chemistry is profound, far exceeding that of a simple purveyor of pigments. He could not resist displaying his expertise when questioned by a supposed fellow enthusiast. Dmitri Volkov is not a merchant. He is an agent of the Tsar, and a highly accomplished one. He has orchestrated this entire affair to shatter our treaty and drive Persia into the arms of his masters," observed Sherlock Holmes. A newfound hardness entered Major Stamford's voice. The soldier had replaced the fretful diplomat. "Then, we must arrest him. We can have him taken at once," Major Henry Stamford said. "And cause a diplomatic incident of the highest order? No. We have no proof, only my deductions. We must compel him to expose himself. His vanity, Major, is his great weakness. An intellect such as his craves recognition. We shall provide him with a stage upon which he can perform his own unmasking," Sherlock Holmes responded. Holmes leaned forward, his reedy voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that filled the quiet office. The plan he outlined was simple, elegant, and hinged entirely on the character of the man he sought to ensnare. "You will send an invitation to Mr. Volkov. It appears a priceless manuscript at the British legation has suffered a peculiar blight, its ink mysteriously fading. As the city's foremost expert, his opinion is desperately sought. I assure you, the temptation to pontificate on a problem of which he is the secret author will be utterly irresistible," declared Sherlock Holmes. A slow smile spread across Major Stamford's face. He stood, his posture erect, his purpose clear. The trap was devised, the bait selected. All that remained was for our quarry to step into the snare. The room Major Stamford had chosen within the British legation was one of heavy mahogany and Persian carpets, its windows shuttered against the Isfahan sun. The only sounds were the quiet ticking of a mantel clock and the strained rasp of Stamford's own breathing. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind our guest, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence, sealing the three of us within the room. Holmes, still stooped in the guise of the weary explorer Sigerson, watched from a shadowed corner, his eyes glittering. "Mr. Volkov, thank you for coming on such short notice. We have a matter of some delicacy. A manuscript we believe has been damaged by a peculiar atmospheric condition," said Major Henry Stamford. Dmitri Volkov, purveyor of rare inks, smiled a thin, patronizing smile. His charisma was a mere veneer, concealing a core of cold steel. He moved with a liquid grace to the table where a single sheet of vellum lay, upon which a line of exquisite Nasta'liq script had been freshly penned. "Atmospheric conditions, Major. More often it is the incompetence of the scribe. Let us see. Ah, yes. The ink is a passable imitation of a classic Persian black. But the binder, the gum Arabic, is of inferior quality. It lacks the proper viscosity," answered Dmitri Volkov. He pontificated for some minutes, gesturing with long, pale fingers, his lecture a masterclass in condescension. And as he spoke, I witnessed the phenomenon Holmes had predicted. At first it was a subtle softening of the edges of the elegant script. Then, the sharp, graceful lines began to bleed, the ink seeming to lose its very substance, dissolving into a damp, illegible smudge before our very eyes. A sharp intake of breath from Stamford cut through Volkov's monologue. "What is this? Impossible! The ink is decomposing," Dmitri Volkov said. From the corner of the room a new voice spoke. It was not the reedy, scholarly tone of the Norwegian explorer Sigerson, but a voice I knew as well as my own, a voice of cold, hard logic, sharp and clear as shattering glass. Holmes straightened to his full height, his stoop vanishing, as if it were a cloak he had shrugged off. "It is not decomposing, Mr. Volkov. It is performing precisely as its creator intended. The performance, however, is now at an end," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Volkov spun around, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Major Stamford looked from the transformed Sigerson to the Russian, his mouth agape. The air in the room grew taut, charged with confrontation. "You are a chemist of no small talent. You created an ink based upon a delicate balance of iron salts and tannic acid, stable only in an alkaline medium. Reza Khorasani wrote his final words upon vellum you had supplied, vellum treated with a latent acidic compound. A masterpiece of sabotage, designed to activate over several hours and cast blame upon a divine curse. Holmes took a step forward, his voice dropping to a low, accusatory tone that seemed to pin the Russian to the spot. "But your true genius was in the murder. A slow-acting poison, for which you administered the supposed antidote just before he was to sign the treaty. An antidote which was, in fact, the final component, causing a fatal cardiac event that would appear entirely natural. You killed him to sanctify your curse." The ink on this test sheet dissolved rapidly, because the lamp I lit upon your arrival burns with a treated oil, releasing a vapor that acts as a powerful catalyst. "This catalyst has just exposed not only a saboteur, but a murderer," declared Sherlock Holmes. The Russian agent stood frozen, his mask of civility stripped away to reveal the cornered rat beneath. The only sound was the frantic ticking of the clock, marking the final seconds of his freedom. The tense atmosphere of the British legation had given way to a profound and welcome tranquility. We sat, 2 days later, in a secluded courtyard garden, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and rosewater. A small fountain murmured in the center of the tiled space, its gentle splashing the only sound in the afternoon's warm stillness. The fierce Persian sun was tamed by the shade of a venerable cypress. I felt the knots of anxiety, tied so tightly about my constitution, finally begin to loosen. Holmes, once more the stooped and unassuming Norwegian explorer Sigerson, was examining the intricate blue pattern of a tile at his feet. His focus was as absolute as if it contained the secrets of the universe. The click of a latch followed by the crunch of boots on the gravel path announced an arrival. It was Major Stamford, his face, which I had last seen etched with worry, now alight with profound relief. He strode towards us, his posture straighter, his step more confident than I had yet witnessed. "Sigerson, I cannot express the depth of my gratitude. The legation owes you a debt that can never truly be repaid." "A dispatch arrived from Tehran this morning," Major Henry Stamford said. His voice was buoyant, carrying the weight of a great burden lifted. "Volkov has been quietly escorted to the northern border. Persona non grata. The Russians have disavowed him, of course, blamed his actions on rogue fervor. It is a fiction, but one that serves all parties. The treaty, with a new calligrapher, was signed at dawn." Major Henry Stamford replied. Holmes looked up from his tile, his pale eyes betraying none of the fierce intellect that had burned so brightly at Volkov's unmasking. He appeared once more the placid academic. "Then the balance is restored, Major. A satisfactory outcome," Sherlock Holmes said. Stamford shook his head, a gesture of sincere admiration. "Satisfactory? My dear sir, it is a triumph. You took a so-called divine curse, a thing of smoke and mirrors, and pinned it to a man of flesh and blood. You saved the Crown's influence in this entire region," remarked Major Henry Stamford. Holmes rose slowly, and brushed a speck of dust from his knee. He walked towards the fountain, trailing his fingers in the cool water that trickled from its spout. "Do not mistake my meaning, Major. The curse was not merely smoke and mirrors. That was Volkov's genius, you see. In London such a thing would be dismissed as theatrical chicanery. But here, belief is a force of nature. It can build empires and topple them," observed Sherlock Holmes. His voice had taken on a low, reflective quality. The reedy tone of Sigerson was now imbued with the depth of Holmes's own contemplation. His true weapon was not the gallic acid that dissolved the ink. It was the fear in the heart of the court, the whisper in the bazaar, the conviction that a higher power had intervened. He understood that a superstition, skillfully wielded in the correct environment, can be more potent than any rifle. My Western rationalism could expose the mechanism. But it was the Eastern mysticism that gave the crime its terrible power. Major Stamford fell silent, absorbing the profound truth of the statement. He saw, as I did, that Holmes had not simply solved a crime of chemistry and politics. He had grasped the very soul of the conflict. The silence stretched for a moment, filled only by the fountain's murmur. Finally, The Major cleared his throat, his mind shifting from the philosophical back to the practical. "Well, be that as it may, your fee, Her Majesty's government will be most generous," said Major Henry Stamford. "The intellectual problem has been my reward, Major. Nothing more is required. My work in Isfahan is concluded. I believe a long journey back towards the West is now in order," Sherlock Holmes said. With a final, heartfelt expression of thanks, the Major took his leave. As his footsteps faded, a muezzin's call began to echo from a distant minaret, a haunting melody in the cooling air. I looked at my friend. He stood gazing towards the setting sun. In that moment, I saw more than the master of deduction I had known in London. I saw a man subtly changed by his years of travel. He had journeyed through lands where logic was not the only king. In understanding their mysteries, he had, I believe, deepened his own.